Hey, Peter, we're back.
David, how are you? Welcome back.
Uh, Thanks. How are you doing today?
I am good. Trying to keep warm on this cold, wet day. I can't wait for the
Yeah.
springtime or my trip to Florida. One of the two.
Yes. All right. We heard from producer Gabriel there. So
Yeah.
we have stuff to talk about today. I think our topic today
Mm.
is how the revolution and the changes in next gen AI models are going to transform business and how it's going to impact those businesses. So we jump in and talk about those.
Yeah, let's do that. But first, I just wanted to say one thing, and I thought about it after the prep call that you and I had had, which is, there are people that are listening. We would love to get your feedback. I think that's really important. And if you have questions, please post them. I think, we like to know how we're doing and if we're kind of resonating with what you're looking for. It's important for us to kind of complete that loop and, adjust accordingly. We tried it, certain topics, which specifically about AI and the business. And again, we'd just like to know if what we're saying is resonating. Your feedback would be helpful. With that,
Absolutely.
um, yeah, let's jump into the podcast.
All right. Well,
So,
let's start with maybe what are these next gen AI models that are going to have such a big impact on business? What are we talking about here? Because it seems like it's really hard to keep track of what all these models are doing these days.
I can't even keep track. I mean, I go into OpenAI, it's like your model selection has went from, one model to, I don't know, eight, all
Yeah.
which have different different qualities to them. But I think the big shift has been the move to the reasoning models, which are fundamentally different in many ways than the traditional language
Right.
models. And they are, as the name suggests, better at reasoning at problems than the traditional models are. Traditional models don't operate this way. Reasoning models have something basically called chain of thought reasoning in them. So when you ask it a question, it will attempt to come up with a chain of thought to solve a problem. That's the huge difference. So they tend to be better at solving, fairly complex problems, much like humans do. And they're much better at it.
And it's really funny because it's obvious why that works for human beings, right? Like we all learned in elementary school or whenever to show your work and break down a problem into steps. And
Right.
ultimately, it was not just about showing that you knew the steps, it was that that would get you a better answer or get you the correct answer.
Right.
But it's fascinating that that has such a positive effect on these reasoning models. But it's true, it really does.
Oh, it has a tremendous impact on the results that you're getting. And, even a lot of the use cases that you and I have looked at and problems that we've solved with the more traditional AI. Now, like it's been around for 20 years. The previous generation of language models, um, I would solve problems very differently now with the newer models. I think they give you a
Right.
level of flexibility and problem solving capabilities that are far better than the language models, the traditional language models that are out there.
Yeah.
I know,
Eh,
not to say you couldn't do some of this stuff. I'm sorry. With the other models, it was just more difficult. This is
right.
embedded in these models, hence that's why they're called reasoning models.
Right. And it's also interesting because, to your point, you could do some of this with previous models. You could say, for example, show my work as part
Right.
of your prompt on on a non-reasoning model, and you would get some version of a chain of thought, but it was not going to be as detailed or as
No.
rich as what you get out of these reasoning models, where showing your work is just part of the way that they operate.
And it's interesting watching them work. Like if you go into some of these models and you'll see if you actually ask it to show you its thinking process, you'll see how it iterates through thinking and how it
Yeah.
comes up with really is basically a plan in order to solve your particular problem. And it'll iterate over it in many cases several times until it gets to a set of steps that it will follow to solve your problem specifically. And the results that you see are, you and I have used them or started to use them in our work and are quite impressive. Don't you
Yeah.
think?
I think they're great. And it's really fascinating to watch them, as you said, come up with that plan and then refine the plan. And then the other part that I find fascinating is every once in a while, you'll also see them questioning the results of a particular step in that plan and going
Right,
back and saying, literally sometimes saying, wait, that's not right. Let me try that again, or
right,
let me look
right.
for more information. So it is sort of uncanny in the way that even though it operates on a completely different principle from the way our minds operate
Mhm.
at a behavioral level, it's sort of imitating us.
It is. It's going through all these processes. I mean, we as humans can only go down a couple of different directions where these models can test thousands of different potential opportunities or potential directions. I think, which is what makes them so incredibly powerful, is that they can, in fact, test all these different paths that you can go down and solve a problem, and then come up with the one that it thinks is the best one to solve the problem. And that's fascinating watching it and how it actually works. And in some sense, it's brute force approach to problem solving. It's fine. But I think with these types of models, you are in fact seeing, um, certainly in science, they're starting to use them in science, and you're seeing breakthroughs. You're seeing them discover things that humans wouldn't have actually put together so easily, but are legitimate paths for either further research or just, they take it down a path that you wouldn't have ever expected, which I think is fascinating.
It's also interesting how, these things come in fits and starts. I think if you look at
Mm.
5 years ago, we were 100 years away from AGI, artificial general intelligence. And then 2 years ago, it was maybe within the decade. And as
Right.
of 2 weeks ago, I think they're predicting it. What was it that Sam Altman predicted? I think he said it would be in it was a couple of years, right? In
Yeah, it's a couple years. Yeah. Yeah, they
yeah.
keep bringing the
So
data in. Yeah, they keep bringing it in. I,
I'm
I'm
not sure.
still,
Do you think we'll know when we get there? Like we talk about it as if it's going to be this binary flip from before to after AGI, and it might
I know.
just be more gradual because we might already be in the beginning stages of it,
I
and it will.
Well, I think you're right. I think we're in the beginning stages of it. I don't know, and I think you're spot on. I think you said it correctly. I think it'll happen so slowly we won't appreciate it that it's happened, and then one day it will be the recognition that it's here. And it won't be because we woke up one day and there was some major breakthrough. It'll be just a very slow, iterative process that over time, we've recognized that these models have gotten so powerful that effectively they are intelligent. I mean, whatever
Yep.
intelligence is, you can pick a definition.
Yeah.
But arguably, if you go back to the old Turing test, which was, at the time the definition of artificial intelligence, these models would wildly pass those.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Um, Look, also, the other part that's interesting to me is we used to talk about people who were book smart. And I think, and the implication was that if you were book smart, that was great, but you didn't necessarily know how to apply your intelligence in the real world.
Right.
And if you
Right.
look at many of the models we've had until quite recently, I think you could call them book smart. They could recite back very useful content to you, hence the generative in generative AI, but they couldn't actually do
Right.
anything in the real world. But that's the other thing is changing.
No.
When we talk about impact on business, the other big thing beyond the reasoning models is their agentic capability. And so
Right.
I think that's the other thing that is coming together to make this sort of a big deal and a change in how businesses can use these models.
Oh, I think you're 100% correct. I mean, the first generation of models was great at generating content, and that's what they were doing. They were, statistically generating
Yep.
content. That's all
Yep.
they really effectively did. They weren't thinking per se. I mean, they might have found statistical relationships between data, hence we thought they were reasoning. That I think was more of an accident than a built-in feature. But these models actually think, and you're right, in conjunction with agentic computing. And agentic computing, just to elaborate a little bit, it's been around for decades. It's not something that's really new. There have been agentic frameworks and toolkits that have been out there for at least 25 years. And this again, this is not new. This idea that you can have these pieces of software code running remotely, acting on your behalf and sending information back to you, it's been around for a while. I think where they've gotten now, it's gotten so popular and so powerful, is now you're incorporating reasoning models and language models into these agents. So they are truly acting intelligently on your behalf and feeding the information back into another model. I think that's the big difference. That's the breakthrough. That's why they now have all of a sudden, so now you have reasoning models combined with, all these agents pulling information from various different sources, acting on your behalf. Now that's powerful.
And
That is
and
truly
the
game changer.
And the promise is that not just, you said it, you said they're acting. The promise is not just that they will reason and make decisions, but they will do. They will put those decisions into action. And that's one of the things that has changed. It's a little bit like the early days of robotic process automation,
Right.
except it's RPA on steroids, if you will.
Right. And right. And I think one of the things that these types of models, these reasoning models, in conjunction with agent computing, will take out a whole sector of SaaS products. I think it's just going to eliminate, like, the traditional RPA was a very rigid program. You had to know where things were on the screen and it responded to it. And if things weren't accurate, it didn't work. Now, these things are dynamic and they can deal with the dynamic nature of software and other things, and they can respond accordingly, making them way more powerful. And they don't need to have necessarily understand how the screen is laid out and designed. They can interpret that
Right.
themselves, which is, is incredible.
Good.
You know,
So let's give an example of that because I think that that's you raise a really really important point. So if I were using, we'll say, traditional RPA software, robotic process automation software, as of 2 years ago, I would have had to tell the software exactly how a screen worked, and I would have, using either a
right,
graphical interface or a coding language, I would have said, after you enter information in the box at this location on the screen, you're going to virtually click the button, and here's the underlying HTML code for the button. Or in some cases,
right,
I would say it is exactly at these coordinates on the screen. But I would have to be incredibly precise and specific about how that bot operated. And
exactly,
that that creates a couple of challenges. One is, if the screen changes slightly, the bot might break. If the screen
right,
changes a lot, the bot will break.
right,
And in the era of software as a service, we use a lot of applications where we, the company, does not own or control what that screen looks like. They can change on you without you realizing.
right, right,
The other
100%.
aspect of it is they're not at all fault tolerant in most cases, which is, if there's a piece of data that doesn't come in, if there's a step in the process that doesn't go the way it was designed to, um, they have
Right,
to revert back to the human circuit breaker, I call them, who figures out what happened and fixes the process.
right.
So let's talk about how agentic AI, how agents can behave differently in automating a process, from different from the traditional RPA.
Well, I think let's look at the simplest of simplest cases. And I think without even getting to the business side of it and how you can apply this to business applications and SaaS applications, let's talk about something basic. I want to make a reservation on Friday night and I want to use OpenTable. Okay,
Right.
classic, easy. You've done it. I've done it. We've all done it. I just want to, I want to talk into my phone and say, hey, uh, OpenTable, book me a reservation at a local restaurant that's, an Italian restaurant between hours of 8 and 9 tonight for a table of five. It goes ahead and does it for you. It will load up the OpenTable website. It will put in my information in the proper spaces. Mind you, I've never told it about OpenTable. Doesn't know what the OpenTable screens look like, but it will go ahead and do that. It will query it because it searches for the search bar. It will process screen by screen by screen using generative AI to take apart the screen and what are the components on the screen without us telling it what exactly to do. And it will make an attempt to fill in those boxes, book me a table, and get a response back to me. But no training.
So that's a great example. And so, to sum that up, the difference really is between a robot and an agent, right? A robot does exactly what you tell it to do and no more. And an
Right.
agent is more task focused or outcome focused, right? You said, book me a
Exactly.
table, and you set the agent, if you're the spy master, you turn your agent loose in enemy territory and they figure out how to operate. Um,
Right.
the agent's operating.
It's operating independently. It's by itself. It's making decisions. It's processing the screen. It's putting, values in boxes. It's putting my search criteria there. It's interpreting what I'm saying, and then it's making a decision. It found a Italian restaurant that is within my parameters. It books it, and then it tells me after the fact, "Oh, Peter, I booked you a restaurant." Now, grant you, that's a very simplistic example,
Right.
but I think it's indicative of the types of problems that you can solve, and there are far more complicated problems that you're going to be able to solve with agentic computing and all these reasoning models that are very sophisticated problems you can now solve.
Okay. Well, there's
Yeah.
one way right there. So number one on our list, I guess, of ways that this is going to impact it
Right.
is
Right.
RPA is going to, I mean, do we dare be bold enough or aggressive enough to say RPA will be taken out, will be replaced by agentic computing someday?
Well, let's put it this way: I wouldn't invest in RPA firms right now. Yeah, I think
Okay.
I think it will be taken out, and I do
Wait.
think it will be a whole class of software companies that will maybe they'll find some additional features they can add to their projects, other products that make them still valuable. But with OpenAI and these other model providers nipping at your heels to do your job, I think it's going to be exceedingly difficult.
You and I both spent so much time working in financial services that I feel like now I should like go into my fast talking low voice and say, "We are not registered investment advisors. This is not investment advice. Please don't take investments from
But
us."
don't listen to
But
us. No.
yeah, um, but I agree. Okay,
Good.
so clearly RPA firms or traditional modes of creating RPA are going to be heavily impacted by these reasoning models and agents. I think that
Right.
makes sense. What about at the personal level? Like it seems like this is
Yeah.
also going to impact personal productivity uses of AI dramatically.
No, I agree. And it's I think one area, obviously there's a million different personal productivity areas where you can use it, even from writing emails to,
Right.
generating presentations to writing decks, things that we in the past took us a lot of time. And you saw it when I wrote one of our decks recently, using these reasoning models combined with some of the AI tools, what would have normally probably taken me 3 to 4 weeks, I was able to accomplish in a matter of hours.
Right.
And it, allowed me to do the research and generates the research and summarizes it for me and brings it back. And from there, I can generate, decks and speaking points. And obviously, I still make my own changes to it, but it's enormously powerful and it saves me enormous amounts of time. And I think
Yeah.
from a productivity perspective, you can't beat that.
Research is a great word for it, and because I think that what that implies to me is a much deeper level of knowledge retrieval and synthesis than we have had in a year ago from large language models. And the other thing that I really like
Right.
about it, and we've both seen this, is you get to see by seeing that chain of thought reasoning, you get to see
Mhm.
what questions the model is asking and how it's going about
Right.
its research, which means you can step in, you can intervene if you
Right.
think that's got something wrong.
Right.
Now, the problem, of course, is that only matters if you pay attention to what it's doing and you question it and you
Right.
retain your own ownership over it and decide where it's going wrong. But
Right.
it's
Right.
great.
I don't think these models take away your job. I think you have to use them effectively. They're time savers, they're cost savers, they are efficiency tools. They in many cases will find things that you won't, but it doesn't allow you to check your brain and rely on them 110%. I
Right.
think you still have to use your, good old human carbon-based brain and make some decisions about the output from these models. Now, I
Yeah.
think the thing that's really impressive and really important, I think these are where, yes, the concept of agentic computing and, reasoning models is incredibly powerful when you combine the two of them together, and if it gets even more powerful when you have a number of agents out there pulling in from a variety of different sources that the model will then reason through and, either summarize or provide you what you're looking for. But what I've been impressed with, and, I've started using quite significantly lately, or quite a bit lately, are so OpenAI came out with something called Deep Research not too long ago, which is not only is it agents, not only does it allow me to incorporate my own um, content into it, so I can upload, my writings, my presentations, my PDFs, whatever it may be, and I say go research a particular topic, it will cruise the web, it will go across the web, and it will identify a, a lot of sources, and it will pull them in, and it will use those sources to then generate the output. But it's actually fascinating how it works. I will present it with what I want to do. So maybe I want to, in one case, I wanted to do some research on a specific ailment, something that wasn't
Right.
very common, for instance. And I said, look, and then it'll come back. It'll say, okay, that's great. I have 8 more questions for you, Peter. Let me ask you those questions, and it narrows it down further. You give the results, and then it asks you a bunch of more questions. Now it's down a little further, and it says, okay, I'm going to go and do my work now. I'll see you in a little while. And it goes and it will bring in 20, 30, 50 sources across the web. It will cite them, it will incorporate them, and it will generate output. And what you wind up getting is a 5 to 10,000 word document going through all of this with all the citations in the document and links to all of them and the summarization. And that is incredibly powerful and a time saver,
Yeah.
especially for working on complicated
Yeah.
topics.
The citations especially are a godsend.
Hmm.
What I think is also interesting, we're starting to see, is the idea that these agents start to interact with each other, right? And you
Right.
can see it in the case of like some of the hypothetical problems that companies are trying to solve. AI companies, one of them is, for example, book a complicated trip, where you might
Right.
have multiple agents, and one agent is looking at um, accommodations in hotels. One is looking at flights, one's looking at rental cars, and one's looking at meeting scheduling.
Right.
And those agents have to communicate back and forth between each other because one of them might say, "Oh, I can
Right.
get a better flight if we leave on this day instead of that day." But then the hotel agent has to say, "Can I get that night lodging, et cetera, et cetera."
Right.
Or what about agents that are, completely autonomous from each other interacting? Like if you and I someday wanted to schedule a meeting and we had our agents negotiate the time and place of the meeting. Sounds a little bit like we're setting up a duel on the banks of the Hudson River at sunup, but
But you think about it, it's not that far away. I
no.
actually think this is all very imminent. I mean, I think the speed at which some of these things are changing, it's imminent that you will have those things. And, mind it, you and I are obviously in the weeds on all of this stuff, and many have not even heard of this technology. But like most things, it eventually trickles into the masses. And I think
Yep.
these features start getting incorporated into products that you use, whether it's the iPhone or other products, and you'll start seeing more and more of this. But I think, and you and I have spoken about this, the implications on the business setting and
Right.
how it's going to impact, businesses just in general. I think, and that's yet to be seen. I think this kind of upheaval is nobody's ever experienced something like this before, so it's going to be fascinating to see what implications it's going to have on people and processes and everything else within an organization.
Well,
What do you
I'll
think?
tell you the part I'm excited for. Here's what I'm excited for. And you've probably experienced this too. Think back over the years, you have, so many meetings, right? And you're getting burned out from meetings and it's hard to schedule meetings. And how many times has someone jokingly turned to you and said, "Oh, we just need to clone you so you could go to more meetings,"
Oh,
right?
I can't wait for that.
That's what's going to happen. I mean, we're very close to the point
It's
where you and I could train an AI powered avatar of ourselves based
Mhm.
on all of the content that we've created, all the work we've done, the things we've written, etc. And that avatar could attend a meeting in place of us. And in theory, we could even trust it to speak the way we would speak, answer questions the way we would answer them,
Yep.
and come and tell us if there's something that it doesn't know how to answer and we have to step in.
So I don't think it's as far away as I think if we sat down today and we put our heads together, we could probably do that. I think the
I'm ready for that
technology's
one.
gotten to that point. I am. I mean, gratefully we're not sitting in nonstop meetings like we used to, but I don't think it's far away. I think we could legitimately sit there and we could probably, and look, what was the example? It was in Taiwan where somebody, faked a board meeting with the CFO, and everybody in the meeting was fake. They were AI, generated people talking,
Right,
and somehow
right.
got wire transferred, was 30-40 million dollars into his bank account.
Yes.
But yes, I think it's legit. You can in fact do a lot of this stuff. Is it easy? Not necessarily, but it's getting easier by the day.
By the day, and I, for one, will welcome my AI replacement with open arms. Um,
Yes,
hey, Peter, we had a
100%.
question.
So,
We had a question from someone who's watching on LinkedIn Live. It says, what are our thoughts on the U.S. being in a power capacity crisis? An energy executive at Google recently said that we're at capacity crisis levels, and as we continue to invest in more and more data centers to support the energy demands of AI. What do you think? What do you think about that? I know we have a lot of thoughts about that.
we have a lot of thoughts about that. I think none of the fixes for the grid are going to be easy. I don't think that's a multi-year
Yeah.
endeavor. Um, Spinning up nuclear reactors, which I think is ultimately where we need to go, is not something you're going to do in 6 months. Obviously, there's talk about reusing 3 Mile Island, for at least what Microsoft is attempting to do. I don't think
Yeah.
there's an easy answer to any of these questions. I think it really will ultimately drive our efficiencies in the generation or creation of some of these models, because that's going to be easier to achieve than increasing the power and fixing the grid in the U.S., which is
Yeah.
woefully out of date.
You and I totally agree on that. It's
Yep.
we will see some incremental increase in electrical capacity, yes, of course, but the real answer is more efficiency, and that more efficiency will come through,
Yeah.
you know, what we I feel like we and everyone else had maybe beaten the deep seek story to death, but they
Right.
did some things with potentially with more efficiency depending on what you believe and what you read about it, out of necessity, which is
Right.
always a good way to stimulate innovation.
Right.
And then I know we've talked to some folks who are building inferencing chips that
Right.
operate differently from GPUs. And
Right.
I believe those chips will also be more efficient. So I think we're going to
Right.
see advances in
Right.
software, advances in chip design, and probably someday advances. Well, not even someday. Now, what we're also seeing is the power of distillation, that inferencing costs will come down also because if you do
Right.
distillation, you can
Right.
run your inferencing on a smaller model.
Right. Right, 100%. I think there are a couple of angles here. I think you brought up a couple that are really important to mention that I have, that are out. So first, I just want to define. So, power use in a data center. When you're building a model, there are two aspects of it. There is the training portion of the model, which obviously takes up a lot of energy, but that's
Yeah.
finite. That's limited. That goes on for a period of time and then it stops. The real cost of running these models is really on the inference side. And that's why, NVIDIA is not going away because that's where it's spent. The inferencing cost on the model is extraordinarily high because these models are so big, and
Yeah.
that's where you're spending all the energy from. So that's where, like you said, we spoke to some of these vendors with more efficient chips that can run many orders of magnitude faster than NVIDIA chips are going to have a big place in this because they are far more efficient and use far less energy for the amount of work that they actually do. That's certainly number one. And then two, distillation or bringing the size of these models down is also going to be a massive. It's a necessity. It's a,
Yeah.
to make them more efficient, to make them faster, and also with that, they'll run on the smaller devices. You'll now be able to put some of these models on edge devices and really use them.
Yes.
So you have a fully, for argument's sake, you have a fully functioning agent sitting someplace in a field somewhere that is a full-blown computer running a small, maybe, 4-bit language model that's been distilled down to a billion parameters. Totally
Right.
doable.
Yep. I saw something the other day though that made me laugh and maybe even shudder a little bit, which was there was someone had written about the new Gemini 2.0 models and the
Yep.
context window sizes, which are believed to be up to 2 million tokens of context
Yeah.
window.
Something like that. Yep.
And someone had concluded that therefore we no longer needed retrieval augmented generation or any similar approach because you could simply feed everything that you know into the context window. And
Right.
I get why that would be attractive initially, but of course I looked at that and said, if can you imagine the inferencing costs and therefore the electricity cost
Right.
of analyzing 2000 tokens over and over and over. If you have a multi-turn conversation where you ask a question and follow-ups and follow-ups and follow-ups, you're crunching through 2 million tokens of data
Uh-huh.
repeatedly.
Agree.
Enormously wasteful. I mean, I actually feel like to be smart about it, I would rather have a really good model with a smaller context window.
Oh,
And
100% agree with you. Yeah, you and I have spoken about this multiple times. And, I think even in our RPI class, we talk about the cost of a large context window. It's not, I will say this, and I've said this multiple times, and whoever wants to, this is where we will show our age a little bit. There is a real benefit to understanding how the machine works and really getting into the weeds of what is going on underneath the covers. And I think you really have a younger generation of programmers who they look for all intents and purposes at compute as infinite and available at a whim. You don't really need to concern yourself with optimizations. And I think that's really to their detriment. So when you have a 2 million token context window, yeah, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but the costs, like you say, are astronomical, and it's slow.
right,
It's going to slow things down so much. It doesn't make sense at the end of the day. Maybe some cases it does, but I think for the majority, I mean, a big model might have hundreds of layers in it, and those
yeah,
2 million tokens have to traverse every single layer.
yeah. So the other aspect of this, so we talked about increasing supply of energy. We agree that's not going to happen overnight and largely won't be the real long-term answer to this problem just because it couldn't happen fast enough. We know that
Right.
we want to decrease the utilization of energy in models, and models will get more efficient, chips will get more efficient. The other one to me that's interesting is on the consumption angle in terms of companies and people consuming, which I feel like right now we're in the era where, at least based on many of the organizations that we've talked to, there's really no constraint on what they're trying to do with AI models. And they're burning a lot of electrons with no clear goal in mind.
Mhm.
And I think that's the other part of it, is that, you know, these same organizations monitor cash going out the door very closely. If they have
Right,
equipment, they monitor usage and hours and cycles on the equipment very closely, right? Because those things cost real money.
right.
And yet they're not monitoring their consumption of this compute resource and therefore electricity all that closely yet. I think that's going to change too. I think there will have to be better governance, better control, better prioritization about what you want to allocate compute resource to, because it is such a big resource right now.
Oh, it's a tremendous resource, and models, AI models use massive amounts of resources, electricity and otherwise. They just use a lot of
Yeah.
resources, and I think you're spot on. So I think, coming back to the original question that we were asked, I think there's a couple of things that have to take place. I think in the US, there really has to be a revolution in how we generate power. I think we're way behind the curve. I think we need to use, because there really is nothing that's going to supplant nuclear power in terms of efficiency and, being able to generate the kinds of energy I think that we need. It's just, yes, I am clearly a proponent of it. I also think while that's a multi-year endeavor, there are have to be massive efficiencies on running these models, training these models, executing them, being cognizant of what they're really doing, coming up with better, small, efficient models. That's all has to take place as well. As costs come down, but also, and I think we said this last week, conversely, usage tends to go up dramatically
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
exceeding in terms of energy, and wind up using a lot more. That's just normal, I think, human nature. But you're right. I think companies are going to, out of necessity, get smarter about this. I think a lot of organizations today are still, I quote unquote, in the play phase. They're still trying to figure it out. They don't really understand fully the capabilities of these applications and these models, and the learning curve is fairly significant. Um, and they are trying a lot of different things, or they're I don't know. I think some organizations just throw so much at the wall, hoping some of it will stick, for a crude way of putting it, not fully understanding that this may be not the right tool in many cases to solve the problems that they're solving, and
Yeah.
missing the problems that they should be solving where the tools are excellent at, and overlooking them because maybe they're not sexy. And I see a
Yeah.
lot of that as well.
I agree. All right. Well, let's go back to our core topic about impact on business. So we have two things
Yep.
down on the list now. We said RPA gets pushed out in favor of agentic computing, and we talked about the dramatic increase in personal productivity. I want to drill down on, because I think maybe the third item on the list is related to that. You talked about research and the ability, the
Right.
tremendous capabilities around deep research that these tools can do. I think that's maybe a third area, is how we learn in a professional setting, how people learn new skills, new content, new
Right.
coding languages, or whatever it is. I think AI is going to revolutionize the way that we deliver learning to professionals.
Oh, you and I have spoken about this, and even in conjunction with our RPI a relationship at length. I think these tools, and we all do, is as having a interactive tutor that teaches at my level is
Yeah.
amazing. I mean,
Yes.
I sat there when I first installed DeepSeek on my computer. The first thing I did when it came out, I put it on my computer. I was, let me try this and see what it do. I pulled out one of my heavy duty graduate math books, and you have this like little one line theorem that says, yeah, whatever it was, a number theory, whatever it was, and in college I had to go prove it and generate a 50-page proof. I said, prove this, and it did,
Wow. That's
and I
pretty
was
cool.
blown away. Like, this is a great learning tool, and then I can ask it questions about how'd you get to this step and how'd you come to this step, and it will come back with a response.
I
That
think,
is amazing.
yeah. And the fact that it's also an equalizer as far as learning styles goes, it creates
Hmm.
a level playing ground. So
Yes.
I I really struggle sometimes to sit down and force myself to read some of these academic papers that come out
Hmm.
about AI research, because they're brilliant
Dense.
but dense. Yeah, hard read. And sometimes I will literally feed one into one of my favorite learning tools, which is Google's Notebook LM,
Oh, I love that.
and I had it spin up a 40-minute podcast,
Yeah.
and I was taking a walk and listening to two people discuss back and forth together basically what was in this paper. Now, did I get everything out of it that I would have gotten from reading the paper? No. Right. I'm sure I didn't. I know a 40-minute podcast can't replace it, but I got a lot more out of it than I would have if I had just set the paper on the side of my desk and said, I'll read it someday.
Right.
So
100%.
yeah,
I look, to me, this is the revolution in teaching. I think these tools are just I wish I had them when I was growing up. They are amazing at educating people on topics. And I love the fact that it comes in. It's like, again, I have my own private, personalized tutor who can teach me or help me or guide me. And I can ask her questions. And when I'm stuck on something and I can come back, you have to be, look, I encourage people to use these tools for this. This is the best thing. Um, I cannot state enough how powerful. And again, let's take this into the corporate environment. To me, this is incredibly powerful tools for
yeah,
you're sitting at your job, you're doing your job. These are efficiency tools. I don't understand the following. Let me go ask Google's, or I'm sorry, any models, Gemini or whatever, pick your model, and it comes back with a response, and it's just
yeah.
it's just
Amazing, right?
incredible,
Just amazing.
amazing.
Here's the other interesting use case that I think could be really compelling around training and education. We all are familiar with the key man risk that exists in a lot of organizations, right? There's the,
Right.
one person who knows how to do something.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had AI asking that person a series of questions, basically having a conversation, a back and forth, bi-directional conversation with that person
Right.
over a period of time to
Hmm.
learn what they know about a particular field or a particular task or something, and then
Right.
condense that into material that you could more effectively cross-train other people to do what that person does. That
Well,
would be
that's
huge.
you absolutely enormous take, but even take it a step further than that. Let's say you have a bunch of agents that read consumers' email, consumers' Slack messages, have all the presentations, have access to whatever it is, code, for instance, for argument's sake. You have access to, because we all have a very large
Yeah.
digital trail at any organization, and you bring it all together and you summarize it and you ask it questions. Now that key man risk goes away all of a sudden. I think that is for an organization, it's very powerful because it's powerful and it's scary. I mean, look, we
Yeah.
all like to we don't want to, and I think maybe this kind of leads us into more of the soft stuff behind implementing these models at places. It's scary in the sense that you suddenly recognize that you are not, for a lot of people who think they're irreplaceable, that you are, in fact, very replaceable. And that's something that has to be um, sensitive about, to say the least.
Well, let's talk about that because I think you're right. I think that you know whether we think that people are going to be net replaced by AI, it certainly is going to change the roles of humans in running companies,
Right.
right? Like
100%.
if we can do what you just described, which was use AI to surveil my activity and my behavior and learn by inference what it is that I do and think and say, and then
Right.
you can automate part of my job. What does that mean for me as a person? What do I do? Um, it's going to change things, but I am not convinced that it's a bad thing. And
No,
we have some real examples from other parts of the technology world where I think this could be a good thing if we do it right.
I think there's a lot of good things that come out of it. Again, it depends on your point of view, and if you're a half glass full, half glass empty. I tend to be the half glass, full kind of guy. That I think in many cases you're going to take people who are maybe not as, we all have ranges of expertise and experience in our jobs. You have the beginners, you have the experts. You can take people that, or those that are just not very good. You can certainly, I think, in a lot of cases, if you develop these types of systems the right way, take those that are maybe mediocre and make them much better, and those that are great, make them more efficient. So maybe you have, rather than one, three people doing a job, maybe you have two, whatever.
Right,
Um,
right.
I think I look at these as augmentation for human behavior and making better decisions and making us more efficient. I don't look at them as, taking out people. I think that's how I
I
look at
agree.
that. Doesn't say things won't be taken out. There will be changes. I think that's normal. I think a lot of jobs are going to change because of this. Jobs that were previously unautomatable are now automatable. So I think, yes, things are going to
Yeah.
change dramatically,
So
but I think in a good way.
In a good way. And I think let's pare that back, because I think part of what is behind what you're saying is that we're going to see changes in activities, not people. And what I mean by that is I have a lot of different roles I play. Some of
Right.
those roles I'm pretty good at, some of those roles I'm not so good at. Some of them I enjoy doing, and some I don't enjoy doing. AI isn't going to replace David yet, I
No.
hope. AI is going to replace some of those roles I play. So when I am the
Right.
meeting secretary, if AI can take over that role and take action items and meeting minutes and notes from the meeting and track follow-ups, that's great. I love that. Now,
Right.
maybe some people like doing that role and won't welcome the automation of that role. AI will be taking over some project management tasks. You could easily, in fact, you
Right.
already can see plugins to tools like Slack that use AI to basically act as a scrum master in agile development projects.
Right.
You can see AI taking over, we'll say, some of the more mechanical aspects of creative production, not the true human ingenuity and creative
Right.
creativity, but the mechanical aspects of it. So I think it's,
Right.
we can't slice it as broadly as saying these people or these types of people will have to leave and go find other work. I think it's going to be more like these particular tasks or these particular things people do will be automated. And
Yeah.
back to your point
Yeah.
about augmentation, hopefully that translates into then freeing them up to spend more time doing the things that they're actually good at doing and
Right.
enjoy doing.
Right. Right. And I think with any transition in technology, and there are those that will embrace and there are those that will push back. And I think, a lot of it's, again, change occurs, it always occurs, and some of it's purely human nature. Those that want to embrace and change and, see the future will embrace the tech and use it to their advantage. And there are others that will push back on it very hard. And those are the ones that I think in any situation, whether it was AI or something else that was changing, are the ones that
Yeah.
invariably lose out. It's just
Yeah.
part of this is you have to embrace the change. You have to embrace that the world is different. It's not going to be what it was for the previous 20 years. And now you're using a set of tools that presumably can make you a lot better. And it's in many cases, it's taking you out of your
Yeah.
comfort zone. And I think that's the important thing for a lot of people. I think also from an organizational perspective, you have to you can't impose this on people. You can't impose this on employees. I think you have to kind of get their buy-in and then let them embrace it to move forward. Again,
Yeah.
not everybody's going to embrace
Agree.
it. There are people that are going to fight it, but you have to at least make the effort to say, hey, this is something that's going to help us and it's going to make us more competitive, so we need to do this.
100%
And
agree. Story time. I
yes.
have an experience that comes to mind as you say that. So several years back was working on implementing some cloud applications, and we were implementing what we called policy as code. And in
Mm.
this case, it meant that there were certain aspects of software design or application design that historically there had been people in charge of, whether it's security or networking or privacy or other things.
Right.
And their job had been to manually review every design artifact and get engaged at different phases throughout the project and approve everything.
Right.
And you had to have their approval before you could go live. And of course, the policy as code paradigm says let's instead automate that. Let's create an environment, a development environment in which
Right.
you are not able to create technology to create code that doesn't conform to some of these policies.
Okay.
And that's been around for a while. There's a number of scripting and automation tools and test tools that allow you to do that. But the biggest challenge in that was the human factor. It was these people who, for years, had believed that their job was to check every document and sign off on
Right.
it. And
Right.
part of what we helped them refocus on was checking the documents was not their job. Preventing problems was their job.
Right.
Ensuring the security, integrity, etc. of these applications was their job. Checking documents was just the only tool they had to do the job. And so we
Right.
showed them over time, cooperatively, a way in which they could spend their time creating rules and
Right.
articulating those rules that could be then embedded into this
Right.
policy as code implementation we built. And so their
Right.
job went from checking stuff to thinking about what the rules are, adapting those rules as we see new edge cases, changing the
Right.
rules and modifying them as requirements change, and doing some sort of testing and experimentation at the edge so that we could get those
Right.
guardrails more precisely defined.
Right.
That was incredibly uncomfortable, but once they started doing it, I think it's fair to say it was also far more rewarding
Oh, I'm
because
sure.
they were thinking, they were using their years of experience in a much more creative and impactful way than
Right.
simply reading through documents looking for potential issues.
Right. And I think
So
honestly, look, no, God,
I told that story because I think that is emblematic of the way that a lot of rules will change. I think we will go from doing things to prescribing the rules and the processes for how things get done, and then monitoring the doing, but where that doing will happen by AI powered agents.
right.
And our brains are far better used to say what should be done, to be declarative, than to actually go and do the work.
I agree 100%. But like, and then I think you articulated perfectly, those are hard conversations. And I think that's a challenge. I think with embedding a lot of this tech into organizations, it's those hard, difficult conversations that are going to have to take place to pull the organization forward. And those are the tough ones. And, everybody's afraid of what, we're always afraid of the unknown of what we don't know, we don't understand.
Yeah.
And immediately you put up the walls and the guards and, you see, well, my job is going to be this, so, I don't want to change. Once you break down, I think some of those walls, and you have to make individuals part of the process, and make it a decision-making process to choose these tools and use these tools. You'll get through them a little bit easier. But it isn't always, I think, always it's the soft stuff that prevents. That's why projects
Yeah.
fail. It's people. As long as people weren't in
Yeah.
projects would rarely fail. But it goes back to, but it's that part. It's that, and I don't think a lot of managers possess necessarily those level of soft skills to help an organization transform themselves so that they're using these tools to the maximum potential to get the most out of them, to make them the most competitive and get the most out of their people in a good way. Because I think with these tools, that you and I have seen it personally, our level of effectiveness and productivity goes through the roof.
Yes. And to put it very simply, an agent is only useful to the extent that you trust it,
Right.
cooperate with it, and
Right.
use its input. If you reject everything the AI agent tells you, if
Right.
you rely on your conventional wisdom even when it's opposed to what the AI
Right.
generated answer is, then AI is not really contributing anything to the problem, or it is the
No.
problem. It's not contributing to the solution.
I was just gonna say, then it becomes a problem, and then it's just another thing you're dealing with, and you're
Yeah,
refusing to deal with it, and you're not making. And honestly, arguably, done well or implemented well in many cases. If in fact what it tells you is wrong, there should be a feedback loop to train it better, so that the next time it doesn't do that for you. So you continually get better, and you apply these tools to your processes more efficiently and better. Um, I think that's going to be the hard part about all of this stuff. It is really getting individuals to truly embrace it for not just the simple problems, oh, I got to go generate an email, but the difficult, more intractable, more complex processes within any organization where you have people that are very often paid, large sums of money to do things, and are going to push back. And I'll, if I use an example that I have from, my many decades in finance, and, something we had attempted to do probably 2 decades ago, which was, and I always, equity research. Equity research to me is one of those functions of a bank that has always been, in many cases, I think it's heavy people.
yeah.
And many years ago, we had said, let's, can we possibly take a culmination of all this information, put it into a series of models, and this is pre-AI days, more rules driven or expert systems, and basically do it. We didn't do it, but the concept was around for 20 years. But now I think you're at a point where I'd rather take somebody who is very sophisticated about the markets and use these tools to generate this research uh, a lot faster in much more real time, um, and then use the individual, the analyst, to apply their special sauce on top of it, so to speak, and get more out of it.
So based on everything you're saying, I think what we're going to see evolving. to address some of these sort of human factors concerns and how AI is adopted and used, we could see a whole new branch of industrial psychology
Mhm.
emerging around AI and the adoption of AI and how humans, cope with it and interact with it. Um,
Right.
yeah, that's interesting. And it
Oh,
probably
100%.
already exists. I'm just not aware of it, but it
No,
seems
it
like
doesn't
that'll be a big
actually.
field.
Actually, it's funny you should say that. It really doesn't. I don't, because I've done some research on this. I was looking around. I was looking for research on the organizational implications of artificial intelligence, and there really is nothing out there today, or very, very little. There's a total lack. Like I even went to, I subscribe to Harvard Business Review and I read McKinsey on a regular basis to try to get a sense of what's out there, and there was very, very little. I think this is so new. Uh, I don't think, and I haven't seen a lot of people studying it. Doesn't mean they're not. I just haven't seen anything, and it's not for lack of looking.
All right. Well, if
But I
anyone
think you're
who's
right.
watching this is a techno psychologist, get in touch. We'd love to learn more about the field. Okay. All right. So
No.
just to recap where we are so far, we've now talked about kind of four big themes around the
Mhm.
impact on business of these models. We've talked about the impact on RPA. We talked about personal productivity. We talked about learning and research in a professional setting, and we've talked about the impact on humans and how aspects of jobs get automated and how people will
Right.
deal with that. There was something came up in that conversation that I know you and I have also talked about before, which is if humans are being more declarative and doing that instead of saying how they want things done, doesn't that change the way we use software? Doesn't that change the way software gets built? And I think, especially when we talk about like the software as a service market. So, let's talk about that because I think that is another area that is going to be significantly impacted.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And I honestly have, I know we've talked about it, but I haven't gelled my thoughts completely on it. But I think you're right. It's going to change how software is developed, how we
Here's my
approach
theory.
things.
My theory on it is this. We have software when you buy software as a service, and so most of you
Right.
listening are probably familiar with that term, but if you're not, think of that as a packaged application that you don't necessarily have to install on your own machine, but you maybe access it through a web browser. But it's software that you can then configure and use like you want to. And it spans everything from huge products like and whole ecosystems like Salesforce.com all the way down to
Right.
individual, maybe, if you're using Microsoft Office 365 through a browser, you're using software as a service. Now, if you think about the way these applications that are software as a service get built, they have a set of functionality that is developed by the company and it does what it does. And then there's
Right.
often a configuration or customization process that you go through when you onboard your company to use that software. And you're having to do a lot of tailoring to make it work the way you want it to work. But at the same time, that tailoring is also constrained by the fixed nature of what the software does. So if the software offers you parameters and options, you can customize within the scope of those parameters and options, but you can't just make the software do something completely different or
Right.
behave differently. Imagine a world, and this is my theory on where this goes. Imagine the world now in which your software as a service is not a set of predefined code that does certain things, but rather it's a set of agents that are very fine grained. Think microservices for those who are
Yeah.
in a development environment. These micro agents that do things, and rather than focusing on how, you describe what you want to do. You are declarative, and you say, "I want
Right.
this to happen," and the software, effectively, the agents figure out as they do with all agentic tasks, they goal seek and they figure out how to achieve that goal. And you may have 1,000 agents in this environment, and maybe 300 of them actually are involved in that particular goal, right? But those 300 figure out how to do it. And you could buy someday, you could mix agents from different software as a service vendors. So instead of having to have one whole package from vendor A that does five major things, you could say, I like the way vendor A does this, but I like vendor B's that widget, and I like this widget from vendor C, and I want those agents to work together.
Right.
So now, this is not happening today or tomorrow. Well, tomorrow is always a day away, as they say, but it is going to impact the way we think about software as a service. I am absolutely convinced of it.
Well, I think it's going to take us a step further. It's going to think about how we approach problems, period.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. It's interesting, and I'd read this a long time ago. One of the things that language models did was redefine our relationship between with the machine. We're no longer pointing and clicking and typing. We could be declarative. We can tell it what we want, and I think your whole relationship with the machine, the computer, whatever you want to, however you want to term it, how you solve problems, as these tools advance, is going to radically change. And I think
yeah,
you're correct. It's going to be very declarative in nature. You're going to say, "This is the problem that I'd like to solve. Go solve it," and it will self-organize and essentially figure it out. And the whole
yeah,
concept of a custom software product that is designed for a specific problem will, I mean, it does create a whole sense of other problems. I mean, debugging or trying to figure out what's going wrong in those things is n times more complicated, but it will change. I think you're right. I think,
right.
having these fixed SaaS products will eventually might go away.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
they'll put constraints, and the constraints will be just very broad. Like you'll have a CRM, but it's basically a open-ended system, and you can define what you want to do, through being declarative.
And I think that let's that your point about how being declarative really changes the way we interact is a huge, huge point. And as you said that, I was thinking about a real life example that I experienced yesterday, just yesterday. And this is a very specific example, but I was using my iPhone and I wanted to play some music. I was going to sit down and read. And I had updated my phone the night before last, and in Apple Music, there was a new AI powered search capability. And so before AI powered search, I wasn't being declarative about what I wanted to achieve. I had to say how. In this case, I wanted music that would be good to read with, and I
Right,
had to make a decision. I had to say, all right, do I want to search for piano jazz, or do I want to search for Bill Evans, or do I want to search for bebop jazz, etc.? And I
right,
could, or I had to pick an album or whatever, right? But that was, yes, there was some natural language in there because I was, I could
right.
type Bill Evans or piano jazz or whatever I wanted to type. As of yesterday in Apple Music, I could say things like music to read. I said something like jazz that's good for reading and studying, and it created a playlist of jazz that's good for reading and studying. Now
I
that's
have to
just
try
one
this.
tiny example, but
Right,
that is where AI lets you state what you want and not how you want to do it. The
right,
how would have been what genre, what artist, etc. I just said what
right.
I want. I want music that's going to be good for reading and studying. And it knew
Yeah,
enough about
that's
me
amazing.
to know that that would be jazz, not
Right,
whatever.
right. Well, but it has your playing history for the last 30 years or whatever it is. So it knows your likes and dislikes, and it knows what to play. That's fascinating, though. And I think I could go back. It's going to change the relationship with the computer. It's going to change. It's changing the interface. It's how
Yeah,
you interact with these tools and your environment. And gone will be the days ultimately that we're sitting here pointing and clicking, and it really will dramatically change how you interface with all these machines.
yeah.
It's an interesting time that we're embarking on.
It's a blast, right?
Yes,
It's fun as long as you can get used to the new normal of nothing stays the same for more than a couple of days in the technology and AI field. Um, then it can be a
yes.
lot of fun. All right, so we set out to
Oh
have a
no, I agree.
conversation. So we set out to have a conversation about how next gen models can transform business. We talked about what those models are, especially the capabilities around reasoning and the agentic nature of those models. And then we sort of talked about five different areas that they're going to change.
Yes,
We talked about RPA and automation and how that changes with the introduction of AI. We talked about how AI helps you with personal productivity, changes the way you communicate with people,
Right.
changes the way you learn. That was our number three, was around learning and education and training. We talked about the impact on the roles that people play and how you can go from doing work to describing the work that needs to be done and monitoring it and creating the rules around it.
Yep.
And then we talked about how that same sort of paradigm impacts the software market and going from, relatively highly configurable, but still static software
Right.
to dynamic software that responds to stimulus because it has agents that are trained to do that.
Right.
Um, Taken together, those five things, I think that if you and I walked into a company, if we were around in 50 years and we walked into a company who had who was started in 2025 and in 2075, I don't think we'd even recognize how that company ran.
No.
It's going to be a very different corporate environment.
Oh, I think it's going to be a dramatically different corporate environment than what you and I are used to. You and I grew up in the days of still largely pen and paper.
Yes, I wasn't going to bring that up.
But
Or
yes, we did.
pencil and paper, even. Yes.
Pencil and paper, yes. Or I still
Yeah.
had pens on my desk and pencils, and I didn't have a big monitor on my desk. I had none of that stuff. And yeah, no, I mean, we're living in some heady times, and I think a lot of this is it will be a generational shift. And I think, and you always see this, and I've seen this, and you, I'm sure have seen this throughout our careers. And as technology has changed, the younger generations tend to embrace it more readily. And there is, it takes time to work its way through the population before it's fully embraced. But I think you're absolutely correct. I think, 5, 10 years from now, even maybe not even 50 years from now, we're not
Yeah.
going to recognize. Like if you and I had said, what is the office of 2025 going to look back when we were starting out our careers, I can guarantee you it was nothing like this.
No, no, certainly wasn't. Well, it's been the last few years have been a great ride. The next few will be, I'm sure, a wilder ride.
Yep.
I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you for the questions. As Peter said at the beginning, if you have comments, feedback, we'd love to hear it. Um, and I guess that's all for me. Peter, any
Yeah.
closing
No.
thoughts?
No, I think this was, as always, a great conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And love your feedback. Love your comments. If you have any questions or suggestions about the future, things that you'd like us to speak about, please, drop us a note. We'd love to hear them. We try to make them relevant. We try to keep the topics, um, not try to be like everybody else. We want to talk about the other aspects of AI and how it's going to affect everybody. And again, great conversation. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a great week.
Yep. Goodbye. See you next week. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.